I'm just getting feedback. Let's see. Yes, we are live now. Welcome everybody to another session of Phoenix Talks. It's been a while since we've last done this, and we're happy to see you all again. Today we're in conversation with Melissa Hekkers. She's a journalist and author of her upcoming book, Amir's Blue Elephant, A Woman's Journey into the Lives of Europe's Refugees. Melissa is a freelance journalist and author who has frequently been featured in mainstream news outlets and other publications in Cyprus. She's been teaching creative writing to children and adults, and she's also focusing on silence communities in Cyprus, focusing also on migrants and refugee issues. And we got to know Melissa because Melissa wrote a very great article about one of our fellows projects, Leticia's project, 𝗣𝗵cie. I'm representing one of beautiful t-shirts today.
I should have worn mine too, but I didn't think of it.
It's all right. It would have been a bit strange if we're all sitting in the same t-shirt, but it would have been funny. It would have been great. So Melissa and I are going to talk about, first of all, of course, her upcoming book, which I've already received before the launch, which is very exciting. Your launch is on the 11th of in a couple of days. That's exciting.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about your book, but we also want to see a little bit what the book can teach us. What we're getting from it, and the book. I mean, we had a brief conversation earlier about this, and we were already starting to get into all the details without really wanting to. But it's an extremely personal narrative.
Yeah.
Of your experiences in Lesbos when you went there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also written from a perspective that allows for a bit of creativity, and that was very interesting to see, because the character in your book is not Melissa, it's Christine.
Yeah.
But it's so very much Melissa.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially Christine is somewhat my alter ego, let's say. And it was through a writer's residency that I was in Italy. And initially I was intending on writing fiction about the refugee experiences that I had. So the theme was always common. But once I got down on paper, and through the mentorship that I had there, it very quickly became apparent that I wasn't ready for fiction, particularly with regards to this theme. I think perhaps because I am a journalist and I have been in journalism for many years, I very much stick to the facts. And so this was something that I struggled with in the residency. And equally, I think because it is so personal, because it is somewhat of a testament of my experiences, I also found it difficult to just find that liberty of just speaking out, speaking my truth, being emotional, and just saying what I think. And so creating this character, Christine, which resembles me, but isn't me, allowed for room to be both creative, but also not to shy away from my voice, and just stay true to that voice, up to a certain extent, of course, but really to make use of that. And so I think it's more of a technique. It wasn't intentional, and it wasn't intended to confuse anyone. Even though Christine is, a created character, I'm very true to the stories that are depicted. So I don't stir very far away from reality. But it does help in certain settings, in certain things that I wanted to explore a little bit more. Christine was really my hero, and I could really visualize things from a different perspective than from within.
I think it also worked for the reader. It also works in that sense, because when you start reading the book and it's going to be an autobiography, you have a certain expectations of oh, this person is really writing about themselves, and can I relate to that? But fiction and I never used to think like this. I always thought that nonfiction was the way to go because it gives you clear facts and sort of the matter. Even it can be emotional, but when you read fiction, you allow yourself also more to get into into the story, and you allow yourself to think about it more. When it's just facts, it's just matter of fact. But if it's a story and you feel part of it, that really allows the reader to engage also and make up their own mind about things and even respond. Because I was reading it and we I checked with this before, but this, as I started reading it, I had a little bit of a feeling like, wow, this Christine has a bit of an arrogance to her. And let me explain. I don't mean that in a bad way, but in a way that I also feel sometimes when we're talking about migration issues and refugees. We, as people who are very much involved and passionate about this topic, and we often feel that we know everything and we're sort of right about it, and how can this other person think like this? And you had this one point where, well, Christine is checking in on her flight to Lesbos. She hasn't even gotten there yet, and she's already so emotional and passionate about what she's going to see there, and how the check-in lady is talking about, oh, there's the refugee problem and these issues, and Christine is really upset because she wants to say, how can you say this? How can you talk about this? But we were talking about this earlier about the problem with that way of being in our work is how do we start engaging people that maybe think differently and maybe aren't, inherently racist or anti-migrant, but are on that sort of maybe ignorance, maybe front. Or maybe have genuine worries. Because even throughout the book, you have these characters, even like, well, Oliver, who's obviously this horrible boss, but also Arthur, who's a genuinely, nice person who wants to do well, but has a much more pragmatic way of looking at it. He's a photographer. He wants to snap the bad, the horrible images, and then, through that story tell, the story of the migrant. And you have Christine has a very different approach. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you think we can reconcile that as organizations, as people, as projects, as journalists, as
Absolutely.
media,
I mean, first of all, obviously arrogance doesn't work. It doesn't get anywhere. So we kind of throw that out the window. But
even well-meant arrogance.
Yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so, I think it's pertinent that we all have a role to play. I'm very much an advocate of, we each do our job. We each know how to do our job, and therefore we're good at certain things. Not everyone's good at, everything. So I think it's important that each in our different roles, like you mentioned the photographer, Arthur, for example, he's a photographer, but through his photographs, maybe someone might see that photograph and get, I don't know, someone might see it, contact him, get funding for the project, for the situation that they've seen on the photo. So, even through being distant or just doing your job, you can reach out as long as you're kind of focusing on what you do well. The other aspects of it is obviously, I think for me, there's a lot of news out there. There's a lot of media stories. There's a lot of facts. There's a lot of confusing information, conflicting information. And for me, it's the human stories are prime. They're very, very important. Storytelling, seeing it from the perspective of the silence community, having that voice come forward, which is something you're seeing more and more over the years. I think that's super important. But also explaining the facts in a more simple way, I think, and not in such, there's a lot of fear mongering going out there, there's numbers. I always talk about numbers in the media, where we're saying, like 500 people have arrived, and you're saying 500 people as though it's an inaccessible number. It's a number we can't deal with.
Yeah.
But in reality, actually, we can deal with that number. It's not that, it's a lot. I'm not saying 500 people leaving their home is huge. But, on the handling side of things, I don't think it's that overwhelming. And so there's a really, it's all about framing. It's about putting things in positive wording as opposed to negative. I attended a seminar in 2016, maybe, which was about framing. And there was a lady there who had done research about the words used to describe the migration crisis and the refugee crisis, you know. Words like crisis, they're scary. It means we're in a position of fear. It means something bad is going to happen. But if you look at it, I mean, the 2015 crisis that was tagged in newspapers, that was used politically, people have been on the move for hundreds of years, you know? And so there was a crisis in the sense that, you know, politically it was a crisis. And that kind of trickled down all the way to us. You know, we were talking about crises. We were, you know, managing the situation. It came to our doors. Yeah. And I think by describing it as a crisis, it was scary to handle it. But if it was tagged otherwise, perhaps it wouldn't have been so scary to open your door to the person that's standing across the street, you know? So I think she also mentioned the sea, that throughout a couple of years, but during that time, people associated the sea with refugees. I mean, where is that heard of? The sea, you know, for me, I think of the sea.
Holiday.
Beautiful holiday, sunset, you know, the wind, the sea breeze, I don't know. There's so many other things to associate it with. But at that time, it was associated with people on the moves. And it's really interesting how words can define how you think and kind of project feelings.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think that's something we also need to be really careful about. And, you know, I say in the book, how do you differentiate between an economic migrant, a refugee, an asylum seeker? I mean, all these are categories
labels,
of people. Yeah. They're all labeled. They all follow the same system, though. And if you know more about how the system works and understand it intrinsically, then perhaps, you know, those labels will not be as strong as they are.
Absolutely. I think this is, we've talked about this actually many times, not with you in general, about when we, and also in our work, when we with Project 𝗍𝗵cie try to talk about something, really don't like to label people refugees or migrants or you know, because it creates a certain expectations. When you say refugee, people immediately think about war. But there's so many reasons why people are refugees, that it can be in, you know, even economic migrants, as the media likes to call them, or you know, are refugees, but refugee has this victimization again. So you know, it's very difficult to name things, and of course we can just say we work with people, but that also doesn't get the message across about one specific topic that we're talking about. And I think you had one thing which I wanted to mention, it's too long of a quote, it's not really a quote, but you have this conversation with Arthur in the car, you know, where you're talking, or Christine is talking about her own sort of story about how she was uprooted from her home, you know, not going into details now, but about her, you know, experience about not really having a feeling of home and all this. And that was a very strong paragraph about, you know, what it feels to be not a refugee necessarily, but someone who's uprooted from their home, and refugees being the most poignant, most in your face version of that. But Arthur responds to that and says, well, you know, great, but they're not all refugees. They're not all this, or they're not all that, you know, using these labels. And he means well, but he also says one thing, and I do want to quote here, says, and you know, this is exactly what you just mentioned about let's not become custom officers who differentiate between Syrians and Palestinians, Afghans and Africans, Pakistanis, and, you know, you're missing the point. Yes. And this is where we go back to this how do we communicate this? You're missing the point, but how do you communicate the point? Because he says, yes, you know, but how can these countries, they can't absorb the massive influx of people we're witnessing. Look at Germany, look at Greece, look at Lesbos. And now where we are as we speak, it's unfair for the local population to have to cope with this. Now, you just said, you know, 500 people isn't that much. The coping isn't that much. It shouldn't have to be that much. But we are faced with this language. How do we deal with that? So, you know, the check-in lady, how do you talk with her? How do you convince these things? And you mentioned something about, you know, taxes and about where the money comes from.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I mentioned to you before. Which goes back to education and awareness, right? Where particularly in Cyprus, I often get this rhetoric of saying, you know, oh, you know, refugees, and they've come here, they're taking our jobs, and then, you know, there's crime and the increase and da 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 da. And then, but once I say to them, look, yeah, okay, they're not taking your jobs, you know, there's room for everyone. And I said, yeah, but you know, the states are paying for them to be asylum seekers. They pay for their rent, they pay for their food coupons, they pay for this and that and the other. And I say, yeah, but that money is actually not coming from Cyprus. It's coming from a European fund, right? That's dedicated to that. And as soon as they realize that, oh, I mean, of course, that European fund is coming from all of us, you know, somewhere down the line, but it's not directly affiliated to their country. They kind of tone down and really, I didn't realize. And immediately, once they've got the understanding of, you know, the whole system behind it and who's addressing and from where it's coming, they tone down. So again, it comes back. I mean, of course, we have to talk about education. Of course, we have to get our children to be aware of this from a young age, so that you catch it, you know, from a young age. Now, addressing it, you know, from further generations, I think anything that can be relatable. I think everyone at some point can relate to something. I mean, it's the same. Can relate or can't relate. I had the example when I left for Lesbos, I met with some Cypriots there who their parents were refugees themselves. And we had this whole conversation about, I said, well, actually, your grandparents weren't refugees. They were internally displaced, right? So it was, and it's something hard to address to any Cypriot, I think, because they're recognized as refugees in Cyprus. But, you know, the United Nations, for example, recognize them as internally displaced, okay? And when I've had these conversations with them, in my mind, it was, you know, their parents, grandparents were refugees. Of course they understand. Yeah, but actually the reaction that I got was because they were so fearful about what their grandparents went through and they didn't want to go back there. They don't want to. So that the reaction was that they would disassociate themselves with the whole refugee thing, because it's too much for them. It's too close to the heart. They've heard too many stories. And so in that sense, that's not a good way to kind of try and enlighten them. You have to come from a different angle. But I'm sure that there are ways for people to relate. The human stories are definitely one way. I think people can identify. One of the hopes for this book is that because it's a storybook, because I consider it quite light in the sense that, you know, it doesn't really, it's easy to read, I want to believe. I think that's more approachable than, you know, reading really hard factual stories, you know, with all the numbers and the politics behind and everything. Not many people can afford that. So it's you know, that would be another way. And I mean, projects like what you're doing, where you're raising, you're empowering individuals to speak for themselves, is another avenue. I think for many years I felt I was speaking on behalf of many people, where I feel if they speak for themselves, they say they have a different narrative, which perhaps can, you know, touch someone easier than if it's someone else doing it.
Yeah, I think, you know, the difficulty is we're looking at it from different perspectives, and I think finding that common, and that's why we're trying to do one angle to it, right? We're trying to do the positive storytelling. That's why we don't share bad news about migration on our Facebook. We don't post, you know, this happened, or this political situation happened, or this went bad, or we don't even try to really publicly criticize anyone or anything. We because we don't want to make it a political issue.
Yeah.
On the first level, we do want to make it a political issue by telling positive stories of people achieving things in our society that happen to come from elsewhere. And there are so many positive examples of that. But it's not the only way to tell the story, because, you know, you say in the book as well, this is, you know, when you're well, again, Christine, it's hard, you know, this is good, but this is what I liked about it as well. Christine says, you know, at some point her boss had asked her to write this story, this news feature, and she just can't find the words to tell the story in, you know, and she says, the more I wrote, the more I deleted, the more I deleted, the more I realized I was incapable of depicting reality. There were so many angles from which to address the situation, and none of them rang true. Not enough words could ever mirror the truth, and merely stating the facts didn't appeal to me. So I want to add a quote to that, because as I was reading on it, I thought it was a really good quote, but it was also about this reality. You say, you know, what's happening. Obviously, the reality there was mostly about how chaotic, how difficult, how, you know,
it's an emergency
inhumane.
situation.
Exactly. But it's not just that, because actually when you go on, you talk about, first of all, you know, you have these little bits of light in there, you know, obviously Amir's blue elephant won't spoil anything, but anyway, but you also, in the eventual, you know, the op-ed, you know, that you write in the end, sort of like that, you write about 𝗣𝗵ici𝗲 joy, you know, and it's about these little things and how this Afghan woman loved to cook for her family but wasn't able to do, and you guys enabled her to have that cooking experience in a camp. She was so happy to be cooking, having left her daughter and husband behind in Kabul. She hadn't got her hands dirty for the past 2 months. For a moment there, she found purpose. For a moment there, 𝗣𝗵ici𝗲 felt human again. So it's a very different reality. It's also reality.
Yeah.
No, it's also about, look how little you can do to make someone feel human again. And then you also have the story about, you know, the despair of Muhammad about, you know, not knowing what's going to happen, and just not knowing, can he go to Germany? Does he have to stay? Not knowing what's going on. So we have all these different realities about migration, about refugees, and some of them are negative, some of them are positive. And I think only talking about the positive also neglects an important part of what the story is, because if you only say, look at how great they're doing, there needs to be some kind of, and that's difficult. That's difficult. And I'm not sure, do you have any idea how we, as a, not just as media or as organizations like Project Phoenix, but how can we create this package, and how can we bring it to people that don't know about it or haven't been listening so far? Difficult question.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I mean, I think I try and address it in the last couple of chapters of the book, where I do bring, you know, Christine in the end does bring it about that, you know, this situation is overwhelming. There are obviously refugees, migrants, people like me and you that abuse the system. And that you're going to explore not in just migrant communities. You're going to, you know, you're going to see that in any society. And so I felt it was important not just to naively say, oh, you know, poor refugees in this situation, and it's all this and this and that, and not bring about that, you know, there are the negative impacts of. But it's about relating it again. It's about relating it. It's not because they're refugees, perhaps. It's because, you know, every human being has their qualities and negative. You know, we all do good and bad things at some point in our lives at different levels, of course, you know. So I think it is prime to bring about, you know, the negative and address the negative. Now, how you would, you know, put that forward, I think it's very easy to get heavily. I mean, even on positive stories within the media, my experience has been when I write any stories about refugees, whether it's, you know, a news piece or it's more a feature piece, the comments on social media is overwhelming. I mean, you need to create a thick skin to actually say, okay, I'm not going to take this personally, and perhaps I'm not even going to answer. I'm just going to leave it there, because there's no, you know, it gets to a point where you know you're going to get battered, you know.
For sure.
But do you stop then, you know, purveying your truths, new stories? Do you stop bring? No, I don't think that's an avenue. I'm all for more in-depth analysis, really. More, forget about, you know, 500 people arrived on the shore of 𝗵𝗇 today. It doesn't say anything, you know. Right. I would be more about, okay, they're here, you know. I mean, it's shocking to. I mean, there was a boat, I think yesterday or today, that there were Lebanese people on this boat, you know, and Cyprus they gave a helping hand to the Lebanese. They reacted to the Lebanese explosion, and they were there for them and whatnot. And all of a sudden, you have a boat that the media purveys as though, you know, they sent these people back. And so the first thing I react and say, oh, hang on a minute, you've been helping them, you know, right, through tough times, and this is because this is on a different basis you're now turning them back. But the story was just a snippet, right? Or it just said, by boat, so many people come, some are from Lebanon, we're sending them back. There's no background to the story. Did they really go back? Where were they sent back to? Is there a negotiation in place with the countries that they're trying to see? Obviously, there might be a wave of migrants coming in from Lebanon in the coming months because of the situation. This is all stuff. It might happen, but I'm sure there are underlying stories behind there. But in this news piece, there's nothing to it. So I think it's really, as a journalist and as a a person in the media, I think it's really important that we delve deeper in what we're putting out there. Social media is creating shorter stories, much more flashy stories, and I think that's scary in its own way. Now,
it certainly is,
yeah. I think for NGOs and things, I think if we all, as you say, you were talking about politics earlier on, and that you stir away from that. That, for me, that's fine. You have other bodies such as maybe UNHCR who address it on a different level, on a governmental level, on a legislation level and things. So each to their own, I think, is maybe we just need more voices, more people involved. Now it's going back to the same question: how do you get?
How do you do
people?
that? Yeah. Well, I think the people are out there. I think we have. I mean, what we've noticed as well. I mean, also is that a lot of people like what we're doing in theory, right? And that we get a lot of compliments saying, "Oh, great job, this and this." But we would like to engage those people more, and it doesn't have to be on a grand, gesture. It doesn't have to be money. It doesn't have to be. But if we could perhaps involve those people more in what we do and try to give them little assignments, little tasks, little things to do in their daily life that they can then think about and say, like, next time you hear this or next time you see this, say this or do that. But not something grand confrontational, but just little bits and pieces. I think that would help a lot as well. It's this whole, debate, or not debate, but this whole discourse around racism and intrinsic racism in societies was the same thing. Speak up, do something, say something. Often when you have a conversation amongst friends and somebody says something slightly racist or slightly anti-immigrant, slightly anti-migrant, or anti-refugee, you can say something. You don't have to start an argument. You can just say, like, I don't agree. And that already triggers this sort of response by people. Why don't you agree? Well, I think it's not true for everyone. Okay, then you already break that sort of discourse for people. And also in the other sense, we were talking about this today. Why don't we just, not the best time maybe with COVID right now, but why don't we put a chair and a table with two chairs in the middle of the street and say, ask me anything, and put a refugee behind it or a migrant behind it, and let's talk. Let's talk to random people, not preach to the choir, as they say. Don't always talk to our followers and the people that already say, like, great job. No, to the ones that we don't. And that's the hardest part for us, because we want to be like that, Christine at the airport who says, how can you think like this? I don't even want to talk to you. I'm just going to smile and say, all right, bye, and never see you again. How do we find that strength and patience to talk to people? And what are our arguments? Because it's always easier to argue against
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the human contact is obviously, go back down right to that human contact. I think it's challenging on its own, but I think it's also maybe more accessible. Talking to people on a one-to-one, or I think it's important. I mean, the difference you can make in a person's day just by saying hello. I mean, refugee or not, right? We all have good days, we all have bad days. So, I mean, that human contact is, we've seen it in COVID. We couldn't manage locked in our homes. We needed to be out there. We're social animals, whether we like it or not, right? I think, I don't know. In Belgium, I experienced, they went to another extreme. So there you can actually host refugees in your home legally whilst they're seeking asylum. And there's a whole system in place, and there are platforms that are organizing this, and NGOs and things. And I think, having seen it firsthand, if you have a refugee living with you and you're having dinner, and somewhere around along the line, you're going to have friends who come and have dinner with you. And then suddenly they're interacting, you know, on a very social level around the table. We're making food together and all that. And that really enlightens minds, because you stir away from all the politics and everything. You're sitting around the table. You're at your friend's house, and he's part of it. So I think initiatives like this is really, that goes a long way, you know. And we did a video project. We got an EU funding a couple of years back, where we were doing short films with refugees. So we had team, I mean, 𝗣𝗵cie𝗲𝗀 from the 𝗣𝗵cie project was one of the participants. And what we did there is that we combined one refugee and one local to do a film together, and each talk about what is home to them, okay? And through this project, I mean, okay, there were 10 participants, 11 I think they were, in the end there was a team of 3. But these 11 participants, they were youth, so we're talking, you know, under 25. And the Cypriots were going home, talking to their parents and talking to the grandparents. And by the end of it, it was a long, again, you know, time is important. We spent 3 months together. And by the end of the 3 months, we had mothers and grandmothers who had never been in contact with any refugees, didn't really know much about the situation. You know, it was neither for or, you know, they didn't really place it. But by the end of it, they really embraced, you know, this participant's partner. This participant who was from Somalia, you know, was telling us, I didn't realize I was coming to a country where there were actually refugees from the country itself, you know. So this, you know, so there was this whole exchange. And I think these 11, I mean, one of the participants, one of the Cypriots, landed up changing her path completely and going to Spain. I think she is now working with refugees on a voluntary basis in an NGO. So, I mean, you change the lives of these 11 people, and then that can kind of, you know, spider out. I think the more we talk about it, the more I you know, I kind of go towards that direction.
I think I agree with you. I think one of the things that, you know, we're struggling with in a sense is how can we tell these stories and how can we do this? And this is an amazing way to do that. And we were also, you know, a little bit of a teaser. We haven't really, it's going to happen hopefully, but we're really thinking about how we can bring people together also in Cyprus. And we're thinking about this community center, this space, you know, where it's about food / art / you know, clothes, you know, bringing this together without, you know, giving away too much. But that's all it takes a lot of the time is, and actually we had one of our, we have this advisory network, and one of the people on there is Adel al-Baghdadi, who lives in Rotterdam, and he has this organization called 𝗣𝗵cie, and he's a refugee, former refugee. I don't remember how he wants to be referred to, but his organization does that. They communicate, they talk to communities, parts of society in the Netherlands that aren't so receptive to this, and they sit together and eat a lot of the time, and that brings them together, and they've changed many minds and opened up many conversations, and I think that's a wonderful way of doing it. And it's just that we can't do everything all the time. So we have to find ways that we complement each other. And I think this is where we would like, and this is why we also invited, that's why we were actually really happy about your article, because we've been doing, as you said, we've been doing things, but people don't like to really write about this stuff so much. It's not, as Oliver said in your book, you know, it doesn't sell as well. And I think more and more people want to write it, but the stories get sort of pushed into the dark corners of, not the dark corners, but the more obscure pages, and they're too long. You know, as you said, people have like the attention span of like a 1-year-old, a 6-month-old. I have a 6-month-old. You know, it's like flashing all over the place. So how can we reconcile that? How can we get that? That's very difficult. But I think with articles like you wrote, I think that is what gets, and we got a lot of attention from that. You know, even it was about 𝗣𝗵cie, but you mentioned this very, very graciously in there. But it got us a lot of attention, and it got 𝗣𝗵cie a lot of attention. You know, she's getting messages left and right for her t-shirts. Again, pitching her t-shirts. Look, beautiful t-shirts.
No, it's great. And the whole idea, I mean, again, she's throwing in messages there, you know, very subtly in a way, beautifully in aesthetically, but she is kind of, she's throwing it out there. She's speaking, you know, and I think it's awesome to see that and to outreach like that. I think I say it in the book, you know, someone said to me in Lesbos, because obviously when I left, I was going to save the world, you know, I was going to, you know, change the lives of everyone. And there was a conversation in Lesbos where it's, Melissa, you know, one life, that's all you need. If you've touched one life and you've changed the life of one person, that's more than enough. You don't have to, you know, you've done that, and that's already a lot, you know. And so I know that we want to do loads, but as you say, complement each other and each do our little bit. It's going to get there. I mean, if you compare things from 2015 to today, there's heaps that have happened. You know, there's a lot of progress, there's a lot of outreach, there's a lot of awareness happening, there's a lot of projects being, you know, created both on grassroots and on higher initiatives. And we just have to remain, I think, positive in that, and, you know, not kind of melt under, you know, everything that's going on. And I mean, it's not going to stop either. If you look at climate change, I think we're going to have more and more of people moving, and it's, you know, we just have to remain positive, and awareness, I think, is so important.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I think that is a beautiful introduction to you also, but also to your book. It's coming out on, what is it, Thursday?
So it's on Friday. So it's coming out on Friday here in Nicosia.
Is it the right way around? I'm not sure that. Sometimes it mirrors it. So it's Amir's Blue Elephant.
I mean, it's already online. It's available.
Yes, well,
online
I have it
already.
I bought it.
Yeah.
You didn't bribe me.
No,
so yeah, we'll post the link separately on our page.
Great.
It's already
Thank
in
you.
the, of course. I mean, it's a great book. It's, as you said, it's very easy to read. It's very you know, it reads very easily. It's not an easy book, but it's a very easy read. And it's so you can buy it at your publisher's website. We'll post the link. There's some other links as well, but I think the publisher ones is the best one, of course.
Well, we like to support publishers, you know. I mean, it's on Amazon and things like that, but I think it's you support the publishers and the, you know, the little guys out there.
I don't know if it's visible at all.
Yep, it's 𝗣𝗵cie𝗲 Books.
𝗣𝗵cie𝗲 Books. Yeah. But as I said, we'll post it on our Facebook page.
Lovely.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And I hope that we'll stay in touch, and that you'll write many more beautiful stories about us and our fellows.
Yes. You have to keep active then, and then I can catch up with you. Of course,
we will. Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hey, for having me and this opportunity. And I do hope we stay in touch.
We will, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye.
Bye.